get started. Before starting the meeting, Parian has some housekeeping kind of advices for attendees. Parian, would you go ahead and just let others know about the list of things that you would like to let people know before they're starting the meeting?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, can you all see me? I'm not sure if my webcam is on. Is it?
Yes, we can see you really well.
Yes. I cannot see myself. Okay, so hi everyone. I'm Parian from the ISAM NIG executive team. Just before starting the webinar officially, I just wanted to mention some housekeeping items here. So first of all, it's that we're video recording the whole session. So if for any reason you don't want to be recorded, you can turn your camera off. And afterwards, we will share the video recording with you subsequent to the session. And another thing to mention is please keep your microphones off during the presentations because we are going to be about like 100 people, so there are going to be some noises. So we're going to have 30 minutes for discussion, for group discussion, and also question and answer. So there is a raise your hand button there. Maybe you can find it. So if you want to take part in the group discussion or you want to ask any questions, you can raise your hand, then turn your microphone on, and you can just be a part of the discussion and be keenly appreciated. And also the last thing is about the chat screen. You may see it there, and you may want to use it for asking your questions or sharing any comments with us. And at the end of the session, we are going to take care of all of the comments one by one. So yeah. That's it. Thanks for your attention and wish you all a good webinar.
Okay, good. Now we have 56 attendees so far. So let's get started. And I'm going to ask a few people as much as we can. We have something like 9 minutes to be able to ask people to introduce themselves. It would be nice if others would kind of kindly introduce themselves, and we can have kind of an idea about people who are attending the session. But as we have many people in the list, I need to kind of basically ask them one based on the alphabetic list that I have here. And then if they are available, they just turn on their camera and they introduce themselves really briefly. So Abigail Armatari from the first of the list. Okay, Ali Farhoudian. Ali, yeah, you can hear you right now.
Yeah. Good time, everybody. I'm Ali Farhoudian from Iran. I'm a psychiatrist, and I'm doing addiction psychiatry, involving in research, practice, and education. I'm very glad to see you.
Good. Aniruddha Basu.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
I'm Dr. Aniruddha Basu. I'm working at All India Institute of AIIMS Rishikesh. You remember this All India Institute of Medical Science, which had conducted the conference just a few months back. So one branch is in Rishikesh. So I am working here in the field of addiction medicine. I am mostly a clinician and also do some research and education related to addiction and psychiatry. Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Good. Anna Morphy.
Can you see me by any chance? Or is it just
we can hear you, Anna.
Okay, great. So I'm a lecturer in pharmacology, although with regards to research, I'm more of a cognitive neuroscientist. So my background is fMRI, reward function. I worked in the ICAM studies, which was a platform developed or testing potential new treatments for addiction. In my new role, I'm actually developing an EEG platform to test reward function.
Yeah, and those who are introducing this, it would be nice if everybody turn on their camera that they can see you as well.
Yeah, just try, because it's not working, in fact.
Go ahead, that's okay.
Okay, so I'm French. I'm a neuropsychologist and research scientist at Stanford. So I'm mainly working on, hi. I think it's working now for the webcam. Okay. So I'm mainly working on neuroimaging and neuropsychology in addiction and HIV.
Okay,
So
good.
I'm happy to join the group.
Good. Ashley Jason.
Ashley Etchison. I'm at University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences. I primarily study risks and vulnerabilities for drug and alcohol addictions, primarily looking at people with family histories of kids and young adults with family histories of drug and alcohol addictions, mostly looking at behavioral and brain mechanisms. Thanks for inviting me.
Imenova.
Hi, I'm Denitsa. It's really nice meeting you all, and I'm sorry for not having the option for camera. I'm representative of the Neuroscience group in Medical University in Plovdiv, Bulgaria. Personally, I'm a PhD student in the university in Plovdiv, and basically what we do is fMRI, voxel-based morphometry, magnetic resonance spectroscopy, and in the end of last year we worked with Commonwealth University in Virginia with patients with dependency problems.
Good. Dieter Mierov. Dieter, could you hear us?
Oh, hey, here's Dieter Meyer from University of California, San Francisco in the VA Medical Center. I've been doing neuroimaging research in substance users for more than 2 decades, and are interested in recovery, primarily in recovery from substance use and prediction of relapse.
Good. Emma Jane Rose.
That's me. Hi, I'm Emma Rose. I'm at the I'm at the Prevention Research Centre at Penn State, where my work largely focuses on neurodevelopmental trajectories related to substance use outcomes in adolescents in those who have experienced trauma and adversity. And another part of my research is really about leveraging that to better understand preventive interventions for substance use in young people.
Dr. Nakamaro.
Hello. Hey, how are you, everybody? Yes, I'm not on the video because there is a limitation for video, so just will be my voice. My name is Esther. I'm from Vitória, Brazil. We have here working with a brain stimulation in drug addiction, especially alcohol and crack cocaine addiction. So we have been measuring craving and also electrophysiological data. That's it. Thank you for inviting us.
Good. Okay, Greg Salem.
Hi, everyone. How are you? My name is Greg Salem. I'm a psychiatrist. I'm predominantly interested in developing neuromodulation techniques to treat addictions. And so that's where I've been working. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me. And it's very nice to meet y'all.
Good, good. So we are out of time, so we cannot basically ask all the people in the meeting that we have right now, 65 people in the meeting, to introduce themselves. But I think that that's a good kind of sense about, but right now we have people from, many countries across the world, and I hope it would be a really nice meeting. The first part of the meeting, in the first kind of step, we will have basically the welcome note and the introduction by Dr. Kathleen Brady, who is the president of ISAM. So Kathleen, you're all ears.
Thank you. I'm going to be brief because I know you all have a lot to go over today, but I just really want to congratulate Hamid and Alex for their incredible work, and all of you who are on this call in just pulling this together. I think this is a really important arena for us to collaborate internationally, and really ISAM is one of the few organizations that really does work across, national boundaries. This group has already, for those of you who are new to this group has already been very productive. They have published a roadmap, published a consensus statement. They actually had a neuroscience track at the last ISAM meeting, and in India, and we'll probably have another one at the upcoming meeting in Victoria, Canada. So it's really important. I think the work that you all are doing is really important. We just tend to collaborate with people that are maybe close to us or that we run into at meetings regularly. So this is a real opportunity, I think, to collaborate with people who are going to really be bringing new ideas from a completely different perspective to the forefront here. So I want to congratulate you, wish you the best of luck, and just assure you that ISAM leadership is behind this 100%, and we would like to help in whatever ways we can.
Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you very much. Good. The first speaker would be a group of people from Germany who basically put together a really inspiring consortium for 12 years of kind of research and collaborations in Germany with different centers, which is really, really kind of a good model for us to see how people in Germany are doing a really, really nice job. And we are really glad that we have Andreas Heinz, who is basically a really key figure in the field of addiction medicine, and he kindly accepted to present the ReCoDe consortium in Germany. And I'm hopeful that we can discuss today about how we might be able to explore potentials for collaboration with this really nice consortium in Germany that is being funded for 12 years. I know that, I mean, you need to, every 4 years, you need to provide a report, but hopefully you would be funded for 12 years. And that's a really great model to see how we can learn from the kind of German experience and how we might be able to extend the collaboration with German colleagues and see how we can do internationally in this aspect. So, Andreas, please, go ahead.
Hi everybody. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Okay, yes. Good. So, Summit said we have a collaboration that has a 12-year funding perspective, and it's called Losing and Regaining Control Over Drug Intake. So basically, it's consisting of 3 research tracks. The first research track looks at trajectories. I'll tell you a little more about it in a minute. And then we have mechanisms and interventions. So a key idea in our research consortium is to look at what sometimes has been termed the forgotten majority of patients with particularly alcohol use disorder, but all substance use disorders. So it's neither the young adolescents at the start, nor the very severely ill, but those in the middle who have a tendency to either worsen with their addiction and get more severely dependent, or, as you know, some of them manage to regain control and get out of it. So in order to study them, we thought we looked at 4 key phenomena that may be decisive mechanisms on the way to losing control over drug intake. So, of course, there's discussions about cue and stress effects who are supposed to increase. Alternative reward is supposed to lose its attractiveness. Habit formation should increase and cognitive control should decrease. And we've seen that subjects can be very different. So some may more have problems with cognitive control loss and others with cue and stress effects. So we assume it's a individual difference in all of these phenomena. And of course, I mean, neurobiologically, I don't have to go with you experts too much into that, but we assume that we have specific biological correlates for these different aspects. For example, you usually assume that cognitive control has a lot to do with frontal cortex, top-down regulation, or habit formation as ventral to dorsal shifts, and so on. In the trajectory part, what we basically want to do is we want to use an app that people use over the course of a year. Some of you have done app-based studies already. This is just longer. And in some periods of time when we see that subjects increase or decrease their intake, mainly drugs like alcohol and tobacco and cannabis, we allow other drug consumptions as well because it's supposed to be a more naturalistic study. And when they increase or decrease their consumption strongly, then we can even shift into a mode where they're asked not every 2 days, but every 2 hours what they're doing, and we can localize them. And we also look at movements, patterns, and motor activity, and so on. And the idea is that we get more specific information because we don't just ask retrospectively what happened before you drank so much. And then, as you know, most people will say, I felt terribly stressed. But here we can see how do people feel now, and then we can link it with future behavior. A second part in our consortium is that we want to go to the mechanism. So this is a typically two-step task where you have decision-making on several levels. Like, for example, at the first level, you decide if you drink or not. And at the second level, you have behavior associated with drinking or not drinking. And usually, as you see on the left-hand side, if you, for example, if O1 represents not drinking, then you have all these pink good options, but sometimes you have bad options because you're alone and you don't have anyone to talk to, and you would feel better being drunk. So when we applied this task, I think some of you have used it as well, then you find that cognitive control or more model-based behaviors associated with frontocortical activation, and there's a difference between patients who would later relapse or not. But what we also found is that this is strongly associated, for example, with other variables. Like you can only explain drug consumption behavior when you take into account, for example, expectancies about drug effects. So we want, with our embedding of subjects with apps, we want to select samples from these subjects and then put them in the scanner and see if those who, like, for example, report that they often have cravings when they're confronted with bars or with their best loved places, and we can verify that with the geo-tracking. And we can see if they very strongly react on, let's say, alcohol cues in the scanner as well, or if they have a shift from more goal-directed to more habitual decision-making. And then the basic idea is we want to have interventions that are aimed at these mechanisms. So this is the research consortium's outline. So we have, like in this A track on top, different projects that look at specific effects, like, for example, stress exposure, or we have computational modeling units, and we have an animal experiment that goes with it. In this B domain, we have always twin projects, animal projects, and humans on key mechanisms. And in the C part, we want to modify it. And basically, the key idea again is we look at goal-directed versus habitual decision-making. We look at Pavlovian mechanisms. We look at alternative reward and emotion control. And we look at cognitive control. And we have a backbone of service structures. That's a good thing when you have this kind of consortial funding. So we have a central project to apply this app, and of course, because we want to study 900 subjects over the course of a year each, lots of things will go wrong with the mobile infrastructure. So we have one support project that's just focusing on this app-based registration of what people do. We have a central recruitment and biobanking, and we have a big data infrastructure with this data. And that's already the outlook of this. So it's not guaranteed that we are funded for 12 years. Every 4 years, you have to go through another review. So in the first project phase, we want to focus on these trajectories. And then, as you see, over the course of time, it is supposed to shift towards treatment. So in the last funding period, hopefully we will have a lot of evidence-based interventions that may detect some new aspects of what we can do, because basically what we want to tap into is the knowledge of people with substance use disorders. So they may report on these apps or with their feedback things that we didn't think about that could contribute to losing control, or even more importantly, what makes people tick when they reduce consumption or get control back of it. And that's mainly it. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Andreas. Thank you very much. Okay, we have kind of a few minutes if there is anybody who has any question to ask from Andreas and about the consortium. Antonio, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Andreas. That was a great presentation. So a couple of questions. One of them is about, because it's a multi-site study, I understand. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you have been able to agree on a common protocol, on a standardized, harmonized protocol? That's going to be one of the main goals of ISAM NIG, and it would be good to learn from the experience of others that have done it successfully.
Well, we work together with Mannheim. There's a Central Institute of Mental Health that you may well know. Rainer Spanagel is there as a basic researcher, for example, of Kiefer, and Heike Tost is a colleague who has been working on these kind of geo-tracking studies with apps. And we have a long-term collaboration with Dresden, which is not so far from Germany, from Berlin. And we had a research group for the last 6 years. I mean, most of these contexts, Germany is not that big, so you know each other quite well. And also, took us about 2 years to get to this point here. So you have to have a pre-proposal, then it's selected, and my experience is it depends very much on meetings, and of course. Well, I mean, you need to have a basic trust among people because you share ideas and it may go wrong. Or, we also agreed that I'm the speaker in the first 4 years, but then the speaker will shift to Mannheim. And then in the last 4 years, it will shift to Dresden. So it's not that these people feel that now Berlin dominates it all for the end of the 12 years. All these kind of things are important. And you have to balance that. PIs are based on excellence, but it shouldn't be that, one city dominates it completely and the other ones just have a few projects in there. And so it's a lot of discussion, and we had to have a lot of, well, in Germany you can do personal meetings, but that was very important.
Good. Any other question? Christian.
Sorry.
Christian, we cannot hear you yet. Yeah, we can probably read your lips, but it would be probably a little bit hard. You can type your question in the chat area for everyone, and then we basically can follow that. Anthony, you have a kind of a follow-up question? We have been hearing you for a few seconds.
I did unmute it. I don't know if you hear me now.
Now you're fine.
Now you're fine.
Okay, sorry. Okay, just a very quick question. How far along are you with the projects? I was not there. You might have said it. I'm sorry, I might have missed it.
I didn't get it. What did you want to say? How
far along are you in the project? You lined up 12 years. So in which year are you?
Oh, okay. We are in the first half year. No, that's not really true. We are already in month 7. Yeah, so we took about half a year to set up the protocol. I thought everything is going quicker, but of course it took about half a year to get mainly the main problem is the data security. That's very strict in Europe, and to have apps and have that transferred to a certain place and then, be read out and so on. It took us longer than we thought, and we've been recruiting since about February. So, now we have 3.5 years left, but realistically to reapply, we already have to start, we published the protocol and we are trying to publish research with related or preliminary findings already because it's very tight in the end to reapply and it's very competitive. But yeah, we're in month 7.
Thank you.
Okay, Alex.
Andrea, thank you for the presentation. I'm just wondering, what would be the performance targets that the funders would be expecting you to deliver in the first 4 years?
A couple of Nature or Science papers, but they're a bit more generous with clinicians. They know that, but basically it very much depends on publication success. And of course, we need to get these 900 subjects over the course of 1 year. The problem always is with the first funding period, when you have the data together, you're already in the middle of the reapplication process. So you have to kind of be smart and publish preliminary findings or something that's related to it and so on. The usual problems with these kind of. The good thing is it's not cut off after 4 years necessarily. If we're successful, then it could be 12 years. Usually, good collaborative research centers manage to go on for 12 years. But
So they don't expect you to measure impact other than publication?
Other than publications, not really, no. Publications and, of course, success of promotion of young scientists and so on. But, usually you know how that is. People come and they fly in and it's an international board that will look at us and they basically, usually they look at this group publish well.
Thank you.
Good. And we have a question on the chat area. I mean, you answered that to some extent. It seems that we are going to recruit 900 subjects. So we have a question from Dr. Ramey that how many subjects you are going to recruit?
Yes, 150 controls who are supposed to have like 0 to 2 criteria on the alcohol use disorder, DSM-5 classification, and then we will include already from true criteria onwards. We originally thought we limit at mild to moderate, but we already see that a lot of people easily, get a bit higher in their criteria, so we'll probably be more lenient. But whom we cannot recruit is subjects who ethically should be detoxified, because then we can tell them, okay, use an app for a year and then finally we give you some treatment. So we can only include subjects where it's ethically okay to observe. And of course, we may have an impact of using the app. So people may just reduce consumption because they self-monitor. But if that's strongly the case, then we already have a treatment. So it's not so bad. Yeah.
Any other questions? Andreas, I have a question myself. How do you see potentials for collaborations with other consortiums out of Germany? Is there any way that you can share data or your task or your research protocol? How people can basically join and follow what you are doing in Germany?
Yes, sure. I mean, we already put a publication out that describes the content, and we can gladly share protocols. We did so in Imagen. I don't know who of you is collaborating in the GIGA or Imagen consortium. Imagen was a European consortium with 2,000 adolescents, and these protocols are now shared with, for example, India and China for some of their cohorts. But it's always difficult to get an exact matching of the tests and so on. But as far as possible, I think this is the way to go in prospective studies. So yes, sure, email us or contact us via ISAM or some other network, and we can gladly see how we can collaborate. Or if this is an effort from this whole consortium here, we can discuss how we share and maybe, well, to a very limited degree, we could also include some scales in at least our next funding period, or maybe even in this one. But I'm in the moment, I'm happy if the whole thing starts, and we already have a bit of an overload of questionnaires and aims. So, but it should be possible to cooperate on that.
Sounds perfect. Good. Thank you very much, Andreas, for kind of joining us. I know that you had a kind of really hectic schedule, so thank you very much for being tolerant with us. Thank you very much. So the next speaker would be Dr. Tanya Ramey from NIDA. And Tanya was always really supportive for us, for everything that we are doing in ISAM and ISAM Neuroscience Interest Group, and he is always responsive and helping us in different kind of ideas that we are generating to see how we can basically bring people together and work together. So Tanya, thank you very much for accepting our invitation. Now we are all ears to see what you are going to present about that exciting new specific initiative at NIDA for biomarker development. We cannot hear you, Tanya.
So sorry for that. And let me get to my slides. Okay, so this is we have put together the notice of special interest. And what I can see my second slide. And the first slide of my presentation has the title. And you can also see that it was just recently published. And you could see that it speaks about our interest in biomarkers and biotypes of drug addiction. So, what is the notice of special interest? it's like what has been previously so-called program announcement. And currently, the NIH is trying to move from program announcements towards the notice of special interest issuing to be more specific and to be more effective in outlining the interests in research interests. So what I can see now, I can see my purpose slide that talks about the purpose of this notice of special interest. We have announced our interest in research projects that will be about discovery, development, and perhaps validation, hopefully, of drug addiction biomarkers and biosignatures. We also want to support research projects that would aim at elucidating drug addiction subgroups, what is known in psychiatry as attempts to elucidate biotypes. So as you all know, the current DSM classification is based on the diagnosis of substance use disorder that is based on the substance that is being used. And we would like that in the future to attempt to replace it as kind of a diagnosis with the neurobiologically based diagnosis. And the context for that is that I'm a drug developer, and what I have found out that the existing addiction taxonomy, it may need to be questions for us to make a progress in drug development, because very frequently I see cases where, you would have a very good data, let's say, in several models of, drug addiction, or even across drug addictions, and then you go into the human stage of translational stage of drug development, and your signal disappears. And the reason for that, one of the reasons for that is the extreme heterogeneity of substance use disorders. It's when you diagnose it based on the substance use. So we are thinking that some reconfiguration of substance use classification system would be extremely helpful for drug development, for diagnosing it differently, and also helpful for treatments. And we think that it could be based on attempting to define the certain biotypes of addiction based on neurobiological factors. That comorbidity, dual polysubstance use is prevalent, and while you're looking at the clinical trial, you typically see that people are basing their diagnosis on just prevalent substance being used, and the rest of the information becomes sort of invisible within the context of a clinical trial. And then, of course, yes, the heterogeneity, it dilutes the signal, and, the signal is lost. So to kind of avoid that situation where drug development and addiction becomes like a very difficult, it has high technical risk. There are not so many companies, pharmaceutical companies, who are interested in addiction drug development due to that high technical risk, as well as other factors, but high technical risk is a huge factor. So we would like to change this situation. I have put my next slide, and I'm talking now about NIDA's interest also in peripheral biomarkers, in elucidating neuroimaging patterns, and neurophysiology data, and again, gene expression, epigenetic, genetic risk profiles, and longitudinal trajectories that would be different. Again, not by substance being used, but try to sort of see the groupings that would sort of be like a molecular interactome, like data-driven, and that would certainly underpin this direction towards biotypes of drug addiction versus substance use disorder by certain substance being used. We also see sort of a lots of value in deep phenotyping. And Andreas has mentioned actually something in regards to that, lots of information being collected about subjects who participate in his study. So we would say that we would be very interested in deep phenotyping that could be applied along the domains of neurofunction. To look at the addiction as sort of dimensionally, again, not by substance being used. And so to try to employ the research domain matrix and also to employ what has been developed for alcohol use disorder by Laura Quacco and George Cobb and others. So they sort of started that whole process in trying to delineate the domains for addiction. And so if there would be research projects that would use deep phenotyping approaches and they would use the domains of function versus by substance being used, we would also be interested in such projects. In terms of what to do with all this, we encourage the use of big data analytical approaches. And we, of course, understand that, to get something out of this huge amount of data, one would need to use machine learning approaches and artificial intelligence to, to figure out what are the algorithms that would sort of lead to seeing, to delineating the biotypes of addiction. This slide, it has more sort of specifics, what kind of research projects we, again, are thinking about that we expressed our interest in, and we would support them. We would be interested in research projects that could announce the search for genotype-phenotype correlations, that could try to link genetics with dimensional domains. Those domains like research domain criteria type of domains and the AAR-DOC that you saw in the previous slide, and try to kind of relate features of addiction as a process with the phenotypical and the phenotypical features, and also employ the, for example, fMRI, resting state brain connectivity. That is what Nora Volkov thinks, that we could get something out of a resting state in terms of characterizing the phenotypes. Also,
Tanya, we just have 2 minutes left.
With all that,
2 minutes left.
2 minutes, okay. So together with all that, we have identification, validation of biomarkers, again, biosignatures, and we would like to be transdiagnostic. We would like to get away from substance use disorders. And we are interested in peripheral markers and central markers in their combinations, again, as signatures. And together with, again, repeating myself, with the deeply phenotyped clinical profiles, and there could be some behavioral and cognitive tasks. For example, if you're adding impulsivity to it, could be some task or craving task. And again, in terms of how do you make sense out of this, we are thinking that machine learning approaches need to be used for this. And of course, again, Andreas just talked about that drug use trajectories in substance use disorders, treatment response and time to relapse, predictive biomarkers, not only diagnostic, and identification of clinical assessment instruments that could be useful and could be developed into validated gold standard biomarkers. So we have none currently in addiction. Nothing has been validated to be a gold standard, so-called drug development tool. Okay, so this is a lot of information in a very short period of time. If any questions, please let me know. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. We have a question in the chat area. They're asking that whether NIAAA is also involved or is just a NIDA initiative.
This is just NIDA. This is the NIDA's NOSI.
Okay, and could you just explain to others in terms of what is the difference between NOSI and RFP and other models of program announcement in NIDA?
I said in the very beginning, I said that NOSI, it's notice of special interest, and previously it was called program announcement, PA. Okay, and there are negatives and there are positives. The positive is that you could use this and cite it in your application when you're applying for a certain FOA. To a certain FOA, you could, use this NOSI and cite it. And this is positive. The negative is that there is no set aside money for that. And you will need to apply to the FOAs and to just cite this notice of special interest. It's kind of a parent application.
Could you bring your first slide just to show people the number of the NOSI, because people can find the NOSI if you bring the first slide.
Here.
There are people who are, so this is the NOSI if somebody is interested to basically look inside, and probably they can ask questions from Tanya, because she's the big brain behind the NOSI, so that would be nice and she's super supportive. So thank you very much, Tanya, for joining us and giving us your invaluable time. Antonio, the main chair of the ISAM Neuroscience Interest Group, I'm just his assistant. And Antonio is basically the big brain behind the idea of ISAM Neuroscience Interest Group. And now the next presenter will be Antonio, talking about what we have done for the ISAM Neuroscience Interest Group roadmap and how we might be able to bring collaboration in ISAM Neuroscience Interest Group. Antonio, please.
Thank you very much, Hamid. I don't know about that, the big brain, but anyway, thank you very much. And thank you very much, everybody. It's good to see so many people in these tiny windows. All right, so what I wanted to share with you today is a little bit of the history and a little bit of the consequences of this paper that we published, that has been the first attempt to do something together in the ISAM Neuroscience Interest Group community. So it's a roadmap paper that we published in Frontiers. Probably some of you have read it already. So this is the paper I was referring to, and you can see that it's one of those papers with a very long authorship list. But I'll give you a little bit of the background story of how this paper came about. So these are the pioneers of the ISAM NIG community, Hamid and Alex Baldachino. They realized, going every year to the ISAM conferences, that there was a strong appetite in the ISAM community for having more neuroscience talks and more neuroscience workshops, and to have them somehow organized. So to have a little bit of a track that would include all type of neuroscience approaches and a little bit of a community. And the other thing that they realized is that there were a lot of clinicians around the world that were very keen to apply neuroscience knowledge and neuroscience tools, but they didn't know how. So there was a little bit of a gap, a translational gap between the science that we were generating and the application that science was having in clinical practice. And of course, you can imagine that is a very difficult gap to fill. But they had the vision to try to organize a group to work towards that goal. And then they had the bad idea of inviting me to lead it, initially with Douglas Steele and now leading it with Hamid. So the first point of contact was in the ISAM conference that was in South Korea, in Busan, in 2018. And there in that conference, what we did, in addition to eating a lot of delicious food, was organizing the ISAM NIG group in 4 different chapters, or 4 different subgroups that had a focus on each of the target areas that we wanted to cover. So we had a group working on cognitive assessment, and people like Rob Hester from the University of Melbourne and Raymond Bruno from the University of Tasmania was there. We had another chapter on neuroimaging, and we had Valentina Lorenzetti and Douglas Steele leading it. We had another chapter on cognitive training and remediation, and we had Vic Manning, that is here in the audience today, and David Pennington from the University of California in San Francisco, researcher and clinician, to lead it. And then we had a neurostimulation one that was led by Hamid. And you can notice that he's the only one that was leading on his own. He's the only one that has the ability to do that on himself. So once we established the group, what we did was doing a little bit of a call for collaboration internationally. And if you track the different countries and nationalities that have been involved in the final development of the paper, is really overwhelming. So you can see people from all over the globe, across the 4 or 5 continents, however you want to count them. So it has become an international endeavor. And I'm very encouraged to see so many people registered for the webinar today, because it means that we have really gauged some interest, and let's say that the NIG community is growing. But we wanted to grow more, and we wanted it to be more effective in order to achieve our goals. So today, you're going to hear me talking a lot about collaboration and talking a lot about harmonizing. So the possibility of creating shared protocols like the ones that we were discussing before with Andreas, that can help us to create a real community and the possibility of having studies that are much more powerful in the type of phenomena that they can explain. And this is a little bit of a summary of the proposal, the conceptual proposal that we do on the paper, that is about working with the 4 different domains that I mentioned before in a closed loops approach. So that means that we have 2 aspects that are related to assessment and phenotyping. One is the cognitive assessment, and the other one is the neuroimaging and neural mapping. And the idea is that the 2 of them can work together to generate multi-level targets, biomarkers or biosignatures, as Tanya was mentioning right before. And the idea is that by identifying these multi-level biomarkers, we're going to be able to design interventions that can be much more targeted and much more effective in terms of addressing the main challenges that we have in substance use treatment, including the management of craving and the control of relapses. So the idea is that then we can employ targeted techniques like cognitive training and cognitive remediation and neurostimulation. And we can then work in closed loops again by testing the impact of those interventions on cognitive assessment and neural mapping. That is the proposal, which is very nicely constrained. There is something missing here that probably some of you are already noticing, which are the clinical outcomes. Another thing that we want to try to encourage is collaboration between researchers and clinicians. and to encourage much more studies that can examine what is the impact that cognitive interventions or neuromodulation interventions have not only on cognitive markers, but also in craving, in relapse, in quality of life. So the different groups work together and together with a lot of collaborators from all over the world. And each of the groups worked on a different section of the paper. And at the end of each section, you can see a number of recommendations that we do in order to try to move forward. And what I'll be showing is a little bit of a summary of the different recommendations that we have given in the different areas. But I will also be showing some exemplars of how those recommendations have been put into practice in a new initiative that we have within the ISAM NIG group, which is called Sharing is Caring, which is about sharing protocol, sharing analytical pipelines, sharing assessment materials. So you're going to be seeing some of the examples that this ISAM NIG community has already generated. So in terms of cognitive assessment, these are some of the key recommendations that we were putting forward. One of the things that we have noticed when reviewing the literature is that a lot of the efforts that have been done in terms of applying cognitive assessment in clinical settings, in addiction settings, have been coming from different fields. So they have adapted tools that were previously used in the context of aging and dementia, or in the context of schizophrenia, and there is much less applying things that are specifically related to addiction, so that really are targeting and measuring the constructs that are relevant for substance use disorders. And I'll talk a little bit more about those constructs in a minute. The other thing that we noticed is that a lot of the measures need to be tested in terms of clinical validity. Or we have to prioritize selection of measures that have been tested in terms of clinical validity. So cognitive tests that we know can predict things like treatment retention or relapse down the line. And the other thing that we recommended, although it's easier said than done, is to adopt harmonized cognitive assessment protocols. And we even put forward the possibility of creating a shared cognitive battery that would be called something like the cognitive assessment of addiction. And that battery should have a number of characteristics, including being theoretically grounded, being brief and usable by the addiction workforce. And that is another limitation that we noticed. We do a lot of work in the lab that is not easily translatable into the clinic. And clinicians really want to apply the tools that we can propose. But the first thing that they're worried about is time and burdening participants. And I think we have to do a better job in terms of creating things that are engaging, that are brief, that are repeatable, and that can be clinically used. So in terms of defining neurology, there are a couple of frameworks or attempts that have been done. Like one of them was this Delphi consensus that we did from Monash, and with the collaboration of a lot of international colleagues. Some of them are here in the audience today. And essentially we were asking them about what are the key constructs that define addiction vulnerability and chronicity. And you can see the listing here. So you can see that there is a lot of constructs related to reward processing, some of them related to response inhibition and action selection, and some of them related to habits and compulsivity. And the idea, as Andreas was mentioning before, is that the reward processing and response inhibition one seem to be relevant both for vulnerability and chronicity, but the habits and compulsivity one can be specific to chronicity, according to the experts. And the other framework that has been proposed is the one that Tanya was mentioning before by Laura Cuoco and George Koob, which is about three main domains: incentive salience, negative emotionality, and executive functions. And one thing that I missed when I saw this published is something a little bit more specific on decision making, which is one of the key domains that have shown to have very strong clinical validity. So when we do decision-making testing in the lab, and then we follow up people with addiction problems, like we can see that decision-making is a very strong, reliable marker of relapse. So it has ecological validity, and I think should be acknowledged in these models. And this is just one example of one of the things that we are sharing. So this is some work that we have done between Monash University and Turning Point, which is an addiction treatment center here in Melbourne. And it's a suite of cognitive tests that can be applied online, and they can be applied in tablets or mobile phones. And they are gamified, so they are engaging, and people can easily relate to them, and they can play with them as if they were games. But through them, we can do a lot of deep phenotyping. We can feed computational modeling, and we can apply them in very different contexts, including like repeatable ecological momentary assessments. So we have put the preprint of this work in Psych Archives, and there is the link for you to get it if you're interested. And here's some videos, but I think I won't play them today because the videos are always a little bit of a danger when you are doing presentations. But you can see the videos in this YouTube link as well. So if you go there, you can see how the different tasks work. The other thing we've been doing is moving the lab into the online space. So we've been collaborating with Turning Point that has an online counseling center. So that people go there to look for different treatment options that can be delivered directly online. And what we have done is embedding this cognitive assessment suite into that online treatment center. And we're currently analyzing the results, but it's very interesting. Up to this time, we have seen, for example, how we can capture much more that missing middle that Andreas was talking about. So we can capture much more people that is not at the very severe end of the addiction spectrum. And for example, in terms of demographics, we've been able to capture much more women that you would usually have in treatment samples of substance use disorders. So in the online sample, we have 80% of women, whereas in face-to-face lab studies, it used to be just the opposite, 80% of men. So those were two interesting things that we managed to do through these techniques. In terms of neuroimaging, probably the main limitation that we noticed is that the amount of basic science in neuroimage in addiction is overwhelming, is fantastic. And actually, there is already international initiatives to share protocols and pipelines. I've seen Scott from Enigma here in the tiny window. So that's a fantastic example of how international collaboration can work towards sharing protocols and addressing questions that can be much more ambitious than the ones that we can address on our own. But the thing that we are missing in the neuroimaging literature is much more studies that look into the longitudinal aspects of addiction. So what happens with recovery, how we can use neuroimaging as a prognostic or a predictive tool, how we can implement it in randomized clinical trials as an outcome measure. And I think part of the problem here is that we should be working much more towards the feasibility of neuroimaging protocols. So things that, again, can be brief and can be really useful to inform clinicians and patients on a one-to-one basis. This is one example of one of the initiatives, one of the examples of the Sharing and Caring Initiative. This is work by Hamed and his collaborators at the Laureate Institute of Brain Research. And it's a pool of cues of images that can generate craving for different substances, including opioids and meth. So this is again in one of the archives. It's in the bio archive. So you can again check it and I think I'm saying the right thing, Hamed. Like you can directly download the pool if you're interested in. For cognitive training and remediation, we were advocating for a priori publication of research protocols. And this can help with transparency but it can also help with adoption and implementation. So if the protocol is published, that means that other people can go look at it, and if they want to implement something similar in a different part of the world, they're going to have all the details that they need to go ahead with it. And obviously, if we want to address big questions like addictions are international phenomena, they impact every single corner of the world. So we need to be collaborating in creating these shared protocols and these consistent training paradigms. The other thing is that if you look at the cognitive training and remediation literature, we have been relatively good in demonstrating that cognitive training and remediation can improve cognitive skills, which is great, but it would be much better if we can show that we can generalize those gains into clinical outcomes that are meaningful for people suffering with addiction. So if through cognitive training we can improve craving, we can improve quality of life, we can decrease relapse rates. So that is something that is still missing in the literature, and we advocate for collaboration to try to address it. This is an example of how we've been working with one of the most widely used cognitive training modification programs in addiction, which is CBM, cognitive bias modification. So, for example, what we've been playing with are different formats, from lab-based training, which is done with the joystick, to an app, to virtual reality environments, and working with different users to see how different formats can be relevant for different people and for different implementations of the program. This is another example, which is the Brain Awareness for Recovery Initiative, or BARI, that is more about the psychoeducation and raising awareness about cognitive deficits among people with addiction. And again, with outstanding outreach, it's been translated to many, many languages. And I think I have to translate it to Spanish yet. So it will keep going and expanding. And it's a fantastic tool because it's really translatable and really applicable in every treatment center. In terms of neurostimulation, these are the main recommendations, like the possibility to create international platforms to have consensus, and you'll see an example of that in a second. Setting international standards for high quality evidence on efficacy, increasing the power of the experiments, and encouraging much more multi-session studies versus single dose studies. We made the analogy of pharmacotherapies, like all of the pharmacotherapies that have been successful in addiction have been obviously tested in multiple, let's say in long-term regimens, versus neurostimulation at the moment is mostly focused on single session, and therefore we need to promote much more multi-session studies and strategize efforts to focus resources on clinical feasibility and applicability. This is an example of one consensus that Hamed has been promoting, and it was like the initial paper was published last year in Neuroscience and Biobehavioral Review. So a fantastic collection of experts in addiction and neurostimulation working together to try to give some specific recommendations of how we can feasibly and meaningfully apply brain stimulation in the context of addiction. So these are some of the figures of the impact of the paper, which is encouraging. I mean, like we've been doing really well in terms of number of views, number of downloads, that magic alt metric that we all look these days. So it is interesting because obviously, like, we have a very high alt metric score, but we have also a lot of authors. So it's like 38 tweeters. I think like that's every author of the paper essentially putting one tweet. So maybe it's not that impressive, but we seem to be doing relatively well in terms of impact that is measured by these metrics. If you're interested, like, this is another collection. This is a book that we published last year, collecting world expertise on different aspects of cognition and addiction. So this is a little bit of an expansion of some of the ideas that we have discussed in ISAM NIG. And here are very heartfelt acknowledgements to different people that have been involved. ISAM, that have given us the platform and the structure and the network to start making this possible. And I think it's been an incredible experience. ISAM has a very good mix for me, that I'm a relatively newcomer to the network, an impressive mix of researchers and clinicians, and it's truly international. So every time you go to to ISAM conferences, you learn a little bit about geography, a little bit about culture, and fantastic opportunities for collaboration and integration. Special thanks to the group leaders of different chapters, Rob Hester, Raymond Bruno, Valentina, Vic Manning, and David Pennington, to all the members of ISAM NIG, but we want much more. So hopefully after today, I convince you to engage with the community, and Merang and Parnian that have been incredible in helping us to design this webinar and some of my funding. Thank you very much, everyone. Happy to take questions now.
Thank you very much, Antonio. We are a little bit kind of behind the schedule, so I needed to kind of move forward rapidly. Oh, that you're good. So, kind of the next talk, let me just start the next part. Okay, so here we go. Okay, it's really great that we are moving forward for ISAM NIG, but the major question is, okay, how we might be able to have ISAM NIG as a real collaborative network, how we might be able to have ISAM NIG as something that is actually functioning really well. The idea of having a network of people who have communication and information exchange, as we are doing right now, is something really interesting. So having a group of people who are discussing right now, as we are doing right now, is interesting. But how we might be able to have a sort of coordinated network, that we can have complementary goals. So it seems that there are specific goals that we are right now discussing that are complementary. So how we might be able to develop some complementary goals together, as Antonio was beautifully mentioning about that. And then how we might be able to have compatible goals in a way that we do different things separate from each other, but at the end of the day, we can merge whatever we are doing in different labs and see how we might be able to have a level of coordination between different labs. But at the end of the day, the ideal scenario is having a collaborative network. And in collaborative network, we are supposed to do something together, so create something together. And we are really hopeful to be able to have ISAM NIG as a collaborative network, as a network that is making something together. And the question is how we can move forward for that. So for the couple of minutes, I'm going to just give you ideas about how we might be able to move forward and do something together as something like a collaborative network. Few examples. As Antonio mentioned, we have started with the idea about, okay, how we might be able to do something in the field of non-invasive brain stimulation for addiction medicine. And we have over 90 papers, 90 randomized clinical trials right now with non-invasive brain stimulation in addiction medicine. But there is no harmony in the field. So we realized that we need kind of to do something. And we realized that people across the world are doing different sorts of transcranial electrical or transcranial magnetic stimulations. As you can see, it is not just about US. People across the world are doing different studies. So we realized that we need to have an international network of people who are interested to collaborate. So we sent out an invitation. So we asked people to see how we might be able to have an international network of TSTMS trials for addiction medicine. And we invited people to join the network. And we ended up having 60 labs across the world who were basically interested to join the network. And we made a collaborative network of people who are doing TSTMS together. And as Antonio mentioned, we put together a consensus paper with 76 authors, 56 different labs, 14 different countries. And we are moving forward from this consensus paper to do some shared protocols and do some data collection collectively in different labs across the world. We will have the fourth INTAM webinar in May 13th. Those who are interested to know more about how to bring brain stimulation to addiction medicine and how they might be able to do some trials with different sort of brain stimulation technologies, we definitely will be happy to invite you to that webinar. The other idea is just how we might be able to integrate the imaging technologies and brain stimulation technologies. So we develop another network we call International TES fMRI Network, which has 56 different labs across the world that are collaborating together. And we have INTF webinars, and you can find those kind of webinars on YouTube. And right now we are working together to develop a reporting checklist to get sure we are harmonizing what is happening in the field in terms of reporting and designing the studies. So those who are interested in imaging and brain stimulation, feel free to us to just basically send us an email. We will be happy to share the checklist and the other things that we are developing on that. The other thing that we have, basically, we already have Scott Mackey, Dr. Mackey from Enigma Leadership Core here. And I think that the Enigma Addiction is a really good example of a real working collaborative network that people are sharing data, imaging data in the field of addiction. I really highly encourage you to see their website on Enigma Addiction Consortium. There are lots of great opportunities there. And I mean, kind of in the discussion part of the meeting, if Scott would give us an idea about how we might be able to collaborate with Enigma Addiction, there are definitely great potentials with Enigma Addiction. Within the Enigma Consortium, we started to discuss about how we might be able to do some task-based fMRI data sharing within the Enigma Consortium. And we started with fMRI drug reactivity studies. And we have 335 papers right now with fMRI drug reactivity. So we realized there is no harmony. I mean, people are doing their own things. Results are all over the place. It's really hard to make a conclusion. So we started to develop a checklist to harmonize what is happening in the field. We have a consortium of different people. Right now, a few of them are already in the webinar together, and we are working together to develop a checklist. Right now, we have 82 experts who are invited, and we are working in a Delphi method to develop the checklist. Those who are interested to join that specific initiative, we definitely be happy to invite you. That's the kind of the first few lines of that checklist that we are developing within the Enigma ACRI Consortium. And in the last slide, basically what we have right now in ISAM Neuroscience Interest Group, we have received kind of response from 116 members from 26 different countries. During the last couple of weeks, we just started to invite people a few weeks ago, and it seems that people across the world from many countries, as you can see, not only in US and UK and Canada, but people from other countries. It seems that people are interested to join that specific consortium or specific interest group, how we might be able to bring neuroscience to the clinical practice. And then the question is, okay, how we can do something together. What are the things that we are able to share? If you have any patients, I mean, I have access to the clinical population, assessment, intervention, student expertise time. What are the questions that you have that we can contribute, and what are the results that you like to be replicated in other parts of the world? So we are definitely be happy. We definitely will be happy to see how we might be able to put people together and see how we might be able to promote discussions and collaborations within ISAM Neuroscience Interest Group. And hopefully we can move forward this specific initiative to bring fruits and bring basically applications to the clinical practice in the field. So that's just kind of, I really try to be short to be able to have enough time for other colleagues who are here today to basically, to see how we can discuss about potentials for collaboration. Okay, so now we have time to start the discussions, and we have time for those who are interested to basically share their ideas, basically ask questions, or discuss about what are the things that are happy to share with others. And I would like to ask Alex basically to technically kind of manage the discussions. And at the end of the day, kind of Alex is going to, and Alex, Dr. Baldachino is the ISAM president-elect, who is taking over the ISAM presidency from next year. And Alex would be basically concluding the discussions that we have today to see how we can move forward and do something together. So we have right now the chat space for those who are interested to ask their questions in the chat space. Or the best way would be just basically turn on your mic and your video and ask your question, or just introduce yourself and tell us from, wherever you are, that how you might be able to, share something, or just kind of bring interest to the discussion.
Okay. Thank you, Hamid. I think, in a way, I'm just wondering here, was there too much information for everyone? Just wondering, if we've managed to overload you with too much of a good information. But suppose now it's time for group discussion, yeah?
Yep.
Less talking from the co-chairs and, other contributors. So, can I ask one pertinent question to the group?
It's Francesco Versace here. So the procedure is to talk through the chat or through the mic?
Would you introduce yourself?
Yes, it's Francesco Versace. I'm working at the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center. I use fMRI and ventilated potential to study addiction, nicotine addiction, and obesity. Thank you. So I guess that talking on the mic, it's okay.
Yes, good.
Okay, so you are talking about this collaboration among multiple institutions, and then putting in relation this with what Dr. Ramey presented before from NIDA. So how is NIDA looking about these collaborations? Because the rumor is that NIDA is not interested in consortia anymore. I don't know if that is just a rumor or not, and if this is related also to the notice of special interest that you mentioned before. Thank you.
Tanya?
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't say that this NOSI is very recent, as you have noticed. And we are interested to apply big data to big data sets, as you have also understood, right? This is why we are talking about harmonization and all of that. And it's inevitable that only consortiums could handle such data sets. And only consortiums can create harmonization across many collaborators. And to be able to apply, big data approaches to those, huge amounts of data. So that sort of puts our situation in that, do we want it or do we not want it? I haven't heard that we're not interested. But the way to go is that we are going to, after deeply phenotyped big data sets where those approaches, statistical approaches could be used. That puts us into to make a long story short, we cannot avoid being interested in consortiums. So that's, I couldn't imagine, for example, if you're replying to NOSI, how would individual researcher would be able to handle questions that are delineated in the NOSI? It's impossible. It's impossible. And you have heard the numbers, 900 subjects, and it's only the beginning, right? So you will need to go 900 more, etc., to see something. And this is the way to go. Also, since I'm responding, I wanted to let you know the following. We have put together a deep phenotyping battery, NIDA, okay, which is based on Laura Kwaka and George Cobb battery. And even though it doesn't have that domain of decision-making domain, it has other cognition domain in all its entirety. We have had a group of experts, we kind of used them to select the tasks for the battery. And it was and now we have completed the validation study. I have had experience with such batteries before when I was at Pfizer. And we all have stumbled upon the fact that somebody just mentioned about I believe Antonio mentioned the feasibility factor, and that it's a major thing. This NIDA battery is going to be using that sort of experience, all of that we have accumulated. It's going to be no more than 2 hours. no more than 2 hours. And it will have social cognition, metacognition, it will have executive function, because executive function is like, it's like just you're changing practically, it's a piece of cognition. And in addiction, it's not the major piece. The major piece, what's ruined is social cognition, So we included social cognition, then executive function, we included interoception, which also has huge differences in the population of addicted versus normals. And we have the domains that George Cobb and Laura Quacco has. But the cognition is covered completely in all its entirety. And plus we have resting state, as I said, Nora Volkov thinks that resting state fMRI will give us something, so we have it also there. It's separate. As you know that fMRI runs by an hour, right? So you could put tasks there. But on in itself, the core domains, entire all the battery, it will take 2 hours, no more. So it's going to be presented the poster at APP 2020 in March in New York, and I'm going to send Hamed the poster. So this will be the first presentation of the feasibility and validation study for the battery. And it will be, of course, in public domain. Sorry for a long answer.
But it's the correct answer, Tanya. The long answer is the correct answer. And what you're saying is collaboration is vital for the success of moving things forward.
Yes.
Okay. Can I ask a question to everyone here? We seem to, and the presentation seems to indicate, ideas around precision addiction medicine. And I think we all do bits and pieces of that. And I suppose the NIDA grant has crystallized, looking at biosignatures, not necessarily being substance specific. And is that something, collectively here, new and older members of the neuroscience interest group, that it is a language, a narrative that we can use in order to perhaps find common grounds to work collaboratively? I always worry when no one answers my question.
Yeah, I think yes, but I mean, as far as more specifically what we could do, maybe it's try to identify some subgroups. I mean, I think collectively we all have some pretty broad interests, but to come up with projects, we probably have to kind of start grouping some maybe coming up with, say like for me, I'm more on the risk and prevention side. So maybe people would be more interested in that, would be interested in talking with me about future projects where I probably would have less expertise to contribute to, like working with more like severely affected substance using populations. I mean, that is one way to think about it.
Yeah. I think that's a good point, really, in a sense. The collectiveness of a group, a collaboration group, is to add value to what's already there and to highlight, what the skills are in the different groupings. Hamid, you want to say something?
No, I've talked a lot today, so I'm just trying to listen more.
Yes, I think that the precision medicine construct, I think, is very useful, and it could be an important part of the narrative that we could build on in this collaborative, because clearly there are so many treatments for addiction, and most of these treatments work for some people, but they don't work for all of them. And we still don't quite understand which treatment is going to help which patient. And that clearly, that's the kind of question that could be answered with big data. But as a treatment development researcher, and particularly focused on behavioral and cognitive training treatments for addiction, we really have no clue what's going to help a given patient. And that treatment moderation question is something that would really push the field forward.
Eric, would you introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Eric Garland from the University of Utah, and I study mindfulness-based treatments for addiction with a focus on the neurocognitive and affective mechanisms of mindfulness-based interventions for addiction. And most of my work lately is focused on opioids.
Oh, that's a breath of fresh air. Thank you, Eric. Because I always wondered who is actually researching opioids. We hear a lot about nicotine, alcohol, and stimulants. So it's good to know you, Eric, because I did the same in Scotland.
You too, yes, and I've read many of your papers, so good to see your face.
Right. I think collaborations are based on relationships as well, by the way, not just science. Okay, Scott, do you want to mention the Enigma? Hamid, talked about that, and you had your webinar 2 days ago, yesterday, sorry.
Yeah, sure. Can everybody hear me? Yes. So yeah, I'd encourage anybody who isn't aware of it to think of Enigma addiction as a potential resource for existing data sets. I think part of this conversation is talking about gathering new data, but we have hundreds of millions of dollars invested in collecting neuroimaging and genetic data, which the Enigma Addiction Consortium is in the process of combining and curating, and it's based on a membership type model. So if you have data which you can contribute, you become a member, and any member can make proposals for projects to examine the data. We're open to any types of proposals. We have a large number of data sets comprising the spectrum of substances, alcohol, methamphetamine, fewer opioid studies, though we're starting to do that. But if anybody's interested, please follow up on the website, and we're always welcoming new members. And it's a collaborative effort, so it's based upon the ideas of the membership coming forward with their ideas and their plans.
Considering that you've been working on the Enigma with Hugh for quite some time, what do you think you would have changed from the beginning that would make it better collaboration?
What would have changed from the beginning? A large difficulty we've had is with the behavioral data. There's differences in phenotyping exist between different data sets. And something we've started more recently is we have a behavioral template where we insist that people give a full and complete description of the non-imaging measures that they collected. And I think that's that will start to bear some fruit, because at a certain point, we started off by just looking at the low-hanging fruit, looking at dependent or not dependent groups, but obviously there's a lot more very interesting information which the various sites collect with regard to frequency and quantity that we haven't been able to get at. So I think if we would have changed things, we would have put more of an emphasis on collecting and curating the behavioral phenotyping data right from the beginning.
I think related to there's a lot of environmental factors that go along with having substance use issues. So having a good sense of things like childhood adversity, and then also what's going on currently. I think it's easy when you have a population that's using drugs, it's easy to attribute everything that you see to the drug use, but in a lot of cases that's not really true, or at least it interacts with things that are already there or occurring at the same time along with the drug use. So to make sense of the data, I think, like you said, I think it's really important to have this other measures we need besides just information about drug use that really need to make sense of those populations and the findings we get.
A lot of sites that join the Enigma working group are now starting to ask, what would be measures that you would like us to collect? And I think there's a real hole to be filled by a group of people coming together and making decisions about these are the sorts of things as a group we should be collecting, these behavioral information or other information, that we do it in a systematic way across studies. So if this group can do some of that work, that would be fantastic. Just in giving people some guidelines about, everybody has very, very specific questions, but since you have the people in the room, your participants there, you might be able to ask them some additional questions, which would be collectively very important. So guidance on that, I think, is people are asking for a lot from the membership.
Scott, can you hear me? This is Dieter.
Where are you, Peter? Can you raise your hand?
Yeah, I'm not on camera. I'm sorry. I'm just on the phone here. I'm just wondering whether this is true for the neuroimaging protocols as well. Would be definitely interesting to see what the commonalities is across the imaging protocols that you see, and how we can use that to come up with something that is a harmonized protocol across different, not only across different vendors, but across different research, across different interest groups and so on. So in that context, I know that spectroscopy, for example, is not a big factor here at this stage. It's more about structural and functional imaging and connectivity and so on. But there is, for example, editing sequences to look at neurotransmitters is a big thing for spectroscopists like me. There is, for example, a harmonized protocol available through the Gannett folks who have a sequence that can be used equally across different vendors and therefore allows to make better comparisons across vendors. Something like that would be helpful also for other basic structural or connectivity sequences.
Yeah, I guess that is another question. Another frequently asked question is guidance on imaging parameters. So, and there's people asking also in terms of their grants, they want to mention Enigma addiction to say that we're collecting data which will be useful beyond the primary questions we have. And then is there some imaging parameters we should be using or behavioral questions we should be asking, which would be useful for this subsequent sharing of the data sets. So there's for spectroscopy, I'm not familiar, but there's not much guidance right now in terms of parameter guidance for neuroimaging. Though I think Hamid is attempting to do that with the Q reactivity, which is an excellent start.
So what we're hearing is this international collaboration seems to be a logical platform to not only share ideas, but create some consensus around, and as you're saying, give guidance, not necessarily, I hope, around expert guidance, but it's more around the fact that some countries or some centers actually do have things that have spent a lot of time and money to deliver and to explore that, if that can be adopted in other countries or other centers or with other populations. And as Tanya was saying, they've been developing on a cognitive program, and how would NIG or the network be able to share that and deliver that to the individuals who are not here and do not know about these things.
Yeah, it's a strongly expressed need, and not just for the people here, but maybe for people more junior researchers who have funds that would be useful to have this information from people who spent a longer part of their careers developing these tools.
Thank you, Scott.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
This is Jean. Okay. I just wondered if anyone could speak to maybe
Jane, would you introduce yourself first?
Oh, what's that? Sorry.
Would you introduce yourself to the audience, because people might not know you well?
Introduce yourself.
I'm Jane Joseph. I'm at MUSC, a cognitive neuroscientist. I largely use functional MRI and do functional connectome types of analyses, but also task-based. I have studied drug abuse vulnerability as well as addiction, which is sort of my more current research interest with my wonderful collaborators at MUSC. So So my question is, if anyone can speak to like the issue of when people are applying for grants, and now, you know, big data is very desirable right now. But of course, to get to big data analysis, you have to get big data collection. And so kind of, Scott, you just sort of mentioned something, you know, in terms of like perhaps grants that mention Enigma and contributing to Enigma. Are you all finding that either reviewers and or programs, and maybe Tanya could speak to this, are looking favorably at sort of additional data collection, even if you yourself may not have the expertise for analyzing that? Because I know reviewers don't always like that when you say, oh, we're going to collect this data and analyze it at some point. But now that we have things like Enigma, are you all finding that it's helpful to mention that and even, you know, seeing very favorably to do that kind of thing? So MRS is a great example. If someone doesn't really know what to do with that data, but we can get sequences that have been sort of, you know, gotten the blessing of the ISAM NIG group or whatever. Has anyone, you know, tried that issue? Thanks.
I can answer that. And this is actually not for the review so much as it is for the program and science officers. And as you know, that the NIH has a type of grants which is called cooperative agreement grants, U mechanism grants. And they involve two individuals. You have program officer, and then you receive a science officer. And science officer works like your collaborator, sort of. And I have experience in leading many of such U grants. And I actually encourage usage of data that they are outside of individual researchers sort of a, you know, data set. Like, for example, you would tap into Enigma data and use them for your study. For example, you need more controls, right? Where are you going to get controls? You need somewhere find normative data, right? So you could take it, or like you said, MRS. You have some, you know, sort of a data set of MRS which actually can guide your research. So this is actually a plus. And so you would include that in your proposal, in your study, so that I'm going to propose this and that, but then the rationale will be, or part of my research will be based on that I use, for example, an Enigma data to decide such and such on such and such question. So this is actually a plus because nothing more is possible just based on your individual effort. You know, I'm a little bit exaggerating, but just to make the point that it's inevitable that, you know, you will, and it's encouraged. At least at NIDA, we encourage that in U mechanisms like that I have ran, for example. And I even suggest that to people, you know, if they are not aware, because I think it's a lot, or actually is about awareness. I don't know where we stand with sort of awareness and what Enigma has to offer. And the more we know, the more people will be sort of, you know, in versus out or not aware.
And again, I think a reminder, you know, talking from on a global platform, there's not just NIDA or NIH that provide and, you know, are asking for these type of grant applications. You know, we have the European Union, Andreas, you're well versed in that, and you mentioned the Imogen, Australian research funding, and other types of funding that we should be exploring as well, to see if, you know, as an international consortium, we're able to, you know, attract some interesting funding. I'm conscious of time here. Are there any observations, comments before I go back to the two co-chairs for, you know, their final observations before, I talk about hope. Any other observations and any other?
Just go one.
I have a question.
Christian?
Yes. Is it possible to get the presentation as PDF or at least partial? So because there's a lot of information on what's going on and it would be quite interesting. Is that a possibility?
I suppose we need to ask permission to the people who prepared the PowerPoint presentation, and they're all here. So Antonio said yes. Hamid, you're fine. Tanya, fine. Andreas, you're happy. So yeah, Christian, we'll do that, and we'll share it. I suppose to the other people who might have not been able to come over to this webinar, but hopefully will participate in the second webinar.
Alex,
yeah,
let me just kind of
sorry.
One small point. For it would be nice. I mean, right now as we have time, to introduce Victoria Manning, Vic, and Victoria is going to take over being the host of the second webinar. So she is, the chair of the next webinar, and she would be arranging, inviting people and putting people together. So those who are interested to basically present something in the next webinar, Victoria would be the main person. So for each webinar, we are going to have a separate, basically, host to organize the webinar. And for each webinar, we are going to have a specific topic. For example, for the next webinar, Victoria will tell you, what is the specific topic for the next webinar. But other than the specific topic, we will have both general discussions about the collaborations, whatever we can do together, and also a specific part regarding that specific topic. Victoria, do you want to tell us what will be the topic for the next webinar?
Yeah, just quickly. Hi, everyone. So we were thinking, and I'll be co-chairing this with Antonio, so I'm not taking sole responsibility, and hopefully David as well. Essentially, we were thinking that this webinar will be focused on cognitive training and cognitive remediation. So really looking at interventions that directly or indirectly target cognitive control or top-down processes, as well as more bottom-up stimulus response processes. And obviously that's quite a lot to cover in sort of 90 minutes. So we were thinking of having a separate third webinar looking more at brain stimulation, mindfulness, and other sort of novel interventions, paced breathing, imaginal sensitization, etc. But really, as we've heard today, the focus is really on sort of an overview of where we're at now, what we know so far, what seems to be working well, what are the gaps, what are the opportunities and challenges, the sorts of things that don't often get reported in the papers that we publish, and really highlighting those opportunities for synergistic approaches, ways of enhancing cognitive training effects, staged approaches, that sort of thing. And of course, the priority research questions. We'll encourage speakers to highlight protocols, programs, other resources that can be made available by the Sharing and Caring Initiative. And as we've just heard, really sort of highlight opportunities for international collaboration and funding opportunities by grant schemes that have an international focus from people's respective countries. So that will be the focus of the second one.
Thank you, Victoria. Okay, Antonio, Hamid, quick conclusion to the discussion.
Antonio, please.
Oh, thank you, Hamid. Yeah, very quickly. Thank you very much, everyone. It's been a very interesting discussion and really good points that were raised today. And what I would encourage everyone to do is to collaborate with us. Just to remind you, we have 4 active full STEAM working groups, one on cognitive assessment, another one on neuroimaging, another one on cognitive training and remediation, and another one on neurostimulation. And the idea, as Hamid nicely put, is I think up to this point we've been thinking together, we've been sharing some things, but we haven't been creating new things. So we are at the stage that we are starting to create new things. And of course, we need new people and we need critical mass and we need collaboration to be able to do that. So please, after today, feel free to, or not feel free, I would actively encourage you to email us and to collaborate with us in some of those groups. Or even if you feel that some of the interests that you have not been covered, like for example, Ashley was making a very good point. I mean, we've been focusing on interventions, but we haven't been thinking on the prevention side of things. And there is a lot that neuroscience could tell in the prevention side, of course. So if you feel that there could be another group, and we have the critical mass to create that additional group, like please feel free to propose, and we will definitely consider it and try to help organizing it. So yeah, it seems to me, I mean, in some of the areas that I'm more interested, like cognitive assessment and cognitive remediation, it seems like there is a window of opportunity now to create something that can save us a lot of pain in the future. I mean, Tanya has been talking about the NIDA battery. I think we should be working together, all the people that have been developing kind of similar initiatives, we should be working together to create a harmonized cognitive battery. When we were preparing the paper, I read some literature that I had not seen before about the data comparability of different domains that we typically assess in addiction. And the data comparability of cognitive assessment was the lowest of all the different domains that you can measure in addiction. So it's really worrying, it's really alarming. And there is a lot to do on that space if we want to really address the important questions that we want to address in this population. Same thing for cognitive remediation. And I think like the next webinar is going to be a great advance on that, a great breakthrough on that. But yeah, the main message, the bottom line is please contact us, please collaborate with us to see if we can go into the next step of collaboration of creating harmonized protocols together. Thank you very much.
Good. Yeah, thank you very much, Antonio. And I just echo what Antonio has mentioned. What we are going to do, we are going to send you a specific kind of on-field form, putting some specific areas. If you have a specific interest, have a specific question, something that you want to share, just share those materials with us, and we will kind of circulate within the network to give people an idea about what are the specific expertise areas that you have that you are interested to share. For example, right now in the chat part, we have kind of a feedback from one of the participants that we have. I mean, it seems that Dr. Basu from India, he's interested to work in the field of sleep and EEG, and he's doing different things in that area. So he's interested to share whatever he's providing in India and how we might be able to use that specific resources in other parts of the world. So we will try to see how we might be able to ask from these 160 people that already accepted the invitation to basically introduce themselves and kind of share with us whatever they would be able to share, and see how we might be able to do this matchmaking process in a way that we end up with making something, creating something together. So that is the final outcome. And hopefully in 1 year, we will be back and see what we have developed together, what we have created together. I'm really hopeful that it is going to be happening. And I should mention that just kind of one minor point, that we are planning for some symposiums in the next ISAM meeting, which is going to be in Victoria. And Alex could remind us about the exact timing on that. It is I think in November in Victoria. Yeah. So I mean, I highly kind of encourage people, those who are kind of able to attend on those those specific symposiums. Then we can kind of physically be there, and for 3-4 days we can discuss about different things there to see how we might be able to extend the collaborations. And this specific session is being video recorded, so we will share the video with others, so you can have access to the video if you have not been. I mean, if your colleagues have not been able to attend.
Yeah, Ahmed, can I add on to what you said around ISAM? So I don't know, people who are not familiar with the International Society of Addiction Medicine, there are opportunities for travel ships to attend and present in ISAM conferences of $2,000 each, and they will be open very soon for the ISAM Victoria Congress. But it's also important to be aware that if you're not able to come for the ISAM Victoria, next year it will be in Malta, ISAM Valletta, and the year after it will be in Marrakesh, and hopefully I'm looking at Antonio and Victoria and all the Australians here, and hopefully in 2023 it will be somewhere in Sydney or Melbourne. So it's not necessarily, life goes on, and we're all busy, and sometimes we're already fully booked with things. But just to remind you around, ISAM is a platform, and I always remind the co-chairs of the different interest groups. We have other interest groups. We have a philosophy, social anthropology interest group. We have a spiritual interest group. We have a behavioral addiction interest group. But I always remind the co-chairs to think outside and beyond their comfort zone. So, thinking about addiction, precision medicine, it might be that this group might invite people from computer science and maths, evolutionary biology, statistics, and not just the neuroscientists, which we are all very happy and very proud to be. And I think that could be one element of enriching and making this group different. And the other one is a suggestion that we came around during the ISAM New Delhi Neuroscience Interest Group Symposium. And Hamid was horrified, but I think it was a very good suggestion when you see Hamid horrified, is that, the notion of co-production and actually asking service users and be part of these cognitive remediation therapy. So let's think outside the box as well. And, ISAM provides that platform, that safe platform to do that together. So Hamid, do you want to conclude?
You are the last concluders. Yeah.
We've concluded. So we look forward to seeing you all in the next ISAM webinar, ISAM NIG webinar. Do we know the date, Victoria?
I think it's the 27th of May.
27th of May.
Yeah, it's exactly in 3 months from now. So hopefully you will get together in 3 months. But in between, you will receive emails from ISAM NIG. And many thanks to Panyan and Mehran, who are really seminal for us to be able to navigate everything that we have in ISAM NIG email. So hopefully we will have their help for the next webinar as well. And we will move forward to see how we might be able to do something together.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for those who are attending from places that I know that it's something like 3 a.m. in the morning right now. So it's really great to have that level of contribution to the ISAM NIG.
We'll see you soon. Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.